The galaxy had always measured itself by strength, by fleets, by the size of warships, and by the precision of their strike forces. For millennia, empires rose and fell based on the number of ships they could muster, the range of their weapons, and the brilliance of their admirals. Each civilization believed itself inevitable, convinced that the survival of their star systems depended solely on superior tactics and unchallenged technology.
Among them, the Grand Coalition prided itself on unmatched coordination, a union of 1,000 species, each contributing its finest fleets and most brilliant minds to the perpetuation of dominance. When the signal appeared, it was, at first, merely an anomaly, a faint pulse of energy drifting from the edge of the Terran void, an area long considered quiet, nearly irrelevant, and uninhabited.
The first analysts, relying on decades of galactic experience, assumed it was a distress call, a trap, or the remnants of a forgotten civilization. Its energy signature was unlike anything the galaxy had catalogued, older than the oldest star in their charts, yet resonating with a precision that indicated intelligence. It was not random, it was deliberate, its cadence repeating with a rhythm that seemed both ancient and deliberate, as though the very cosmos itself had folded time to send the message. And embedded within that signal, almost imperceptibly, were coordinates, hyperdimensional coordinates that no ordinary navigation system could resolve. Coordinates that pointed not to planets or stations, but to a point in the void itself, an intersection where reality seemed to thin. The Coalition convened its councils at light speed. Representatives from hundreds of species debated for cycles on the meaning of the signal. Some suggested it was a lure, bait for a trap meant to test the galaxy's greatest fleets. Others insisted it was a call for aid from a hidden species, a challenge to establish dominance over an unknown but potentially powerful civilization. Every hypothesis was dissected, analyzed, and discarded. In the end, the consensus was unavoidable. If a species could generate such a signal, manipulate subspace with that precision, and encode intelligence older than the oldest stars, it could not be ignored. The galaxy would respond, and it would respond with its best. The Grand Coalition assembled the Apex Strike Force, a fleet whose mere presence was enough to cause trembling in nearby systems. It comprised vessels that dwarfed moons, carriers that launched tens of thousands of fighters simultaneously, and warships bristling with weapons capable of reducing entire planets to plasma in seconds. Every admiral who commanded these ships was considered a living legend, their exploits chronicled in histories and ballads, their strategies studied as gospel.
Fleets that had crushed rebellious empires, annihilated rival coalitions, and rewritten the map of known space were mobilized with unparalleled precision. No detail was overlooked: fuel reserves, warp conduit calculations, synchronization of weapon arrays, and even psychological profiles of enemy species were accounted for. Every preparation was meticulous, but no one knew the enemy. Meanwhile, on Earth, the reaction was markedly different. There was no panic, no bureaucratic scramble, no declaration of war. Instead, the signal was intercepted by a select few, individuals who had long been removed from the public eye, who had lived in the shadows of history, and who had once been considered ghosts of humanity's last great conflicts.
They were veterans, not only of physical battles, but of espionage, subterfuge, and operations that had left entire empires wondering if humans had ever existed. Their ships had long been dormant, scattered across secret stations, hidden in deep space, or folded into dimensions only Earth could access. Their war machines were ancient, yet perfected over centuries, rebuilt to levels of sophistication that no current civilization could imagine. Earth did not call fleets, it called ghosts. Pilots who had survived the collapse of colonies, operatives who had slipped through the clutches of galactic intelligence agencies, engineers who could reconstruct entire warships from memory. These were the ones who received the signal and understood it instantly. It was not a threat, it was an opportunity. Humanity's approach to conflict had always been different: patience, observation, and preparation over immediate response. They waited for the moment when the galaxy's arrogance would be most exposed, and then they acted, not in numbers, but in inevitability. As the Coalition's apex strike force advanced, its sensors began reporting strange anomalies near the Terran void. Initial readings suggested minor subspace disturbances, irregular energy fluctuations, and gaps in the stellar background. The anomalies were subtle, almost imperceptible, but persistent. Analysts could not explain them. Then, fleeting shadows appeared. Ships that were detected in one sector and then, milliseconds later, in another. Impossible locations that defied known physics. Coalition commanders assumed glitches in their instruments. They were wrong. Humanity's ghosts were already observing them, testing them, preparing for the engagement that would define the balance of the galaxy. The first communications from the Terran border were received not through open channels, but through the subtle influence of thought and resonance. No human voice spoke, no signal pulsed through subspace. Yet every Coalition commander felt a presence, calm, unyielding, and ancient. You are approaching forbidden space. You are observed. You will not succeed. The message was understood instinctively, bypassing conventional cognition, embedding itself in the decision-making circuits of every officer. Panic began to seed itself in the Coalition ranks, but the illusion of control remained. They had brought their best, and they would need it. They did not yet understand that humanity had never played by the rules of conventional warfare. As the fleets approached the coordinates embedded in the signal, the void itself seemed to react. Space warped subtly around the edges of their sensors. Time, measured by subspace clocks, flickered and stuttered. Ships reported brief moments where the stars themselves shifted, then returned to their expected positions. It was disorienting, unnerving, and unprecedented. Every attempt to scan, to locate, to anticipate, failed. The ghosts of Earth were not attacking yet. They were teaching the Coalition a lesson in futility, demonstrating that the very rules of engagement in this part of the galaxy were no longer those the Coalition could rely upon. And then, as the first tendrils of the Ghost Fleet began to emerge from the shadows of subspace, the galaxy understood that it had been deceived by human silence. The emptiness it had observed was not absence, it was preparation. It was inevitability. Humanity had waited, watched, and learned. The galaxy had sent its best, expecting dominance, expecting submission, expecting the predictable. Humanity had sent its ghosts, and the universe itself would soon remember why the human name was spoken with reverence, fear, and inevitability across the stars. When the first human ghost ships manifested, the Coalition's apex fleets believed it was a mirage. Sensors picked up impossible readings, vessels occupying multiple coordinates at once, their energy signatures fluctuating across dimensions, appearing, disappearing, and reappearing as though reality itself had been rewritten. Fleets that had once crushed entire civilizations now found themselves paralyzed, their systems reporting anomalies they could not explain. The very laws of physics seemed to obey an unseen hand, one that had mastered the manipulation of space, time, and causality. The ghosts moved not as conventional formations, but as extensions of an unseen intelligence. The fleets of the Grand Coalition, organized in meticulous battle lines, suddenly found these lines irrelevant. Human ships appeared inside their ranks, above and below simultaneously, sometimes in the very centers of command bridges. Officers reported brief glimpses of vessels impossibly vast, shimmering with light that seemed to phase between material and energy, before those same ships were detected elsewhere, striking at the most critical nodes of the fleet. There was no warning. There was no time to react. Each engagement was over before the first decision could be made, a demonstration of inevitability rather than brute force. Weapons fired against the human ghosts collapsed mid-flight. Energy beams bent upon themselves, missiles vanished before reaching their targets, and shields designed to withstand planetary bombardments flickered as though they were illusions. Entire fleets experienced what could only be described as anticipatory strikes. The humans seemed to know the outcome of every maneuver before it was executed. It was not luck nor hyperintelligence. It was mastery of probability itself. Coalition admirals, the galaxy's most celebrated strategists, found themselves unable to compute even a single outcome that could preserve their fleets. The first encounters were surgical. Recon ships were neutralized without destruction. Their crews experienced brief, disorienting moments before ceasing to exist, leaving only echoes in the subspace network as the humans extracted information without leaving evidence. Capital ships, bristling with weaponry that could obliterate cities, were rendered immobile, their drives and systems collapsing as the ghosts enveloped them in fields of warped reality. Commanders attempted evasive maneuvers, emergency protocols, and preemptive strikes, yet every attempt failed. Human ghosts did not follow conventional patterns. They operated simultaneously across multiple possibilities, executing attacks in the present, future, and potential pasts, erasing threats before they fully existed. Coalition officers who survived the initial encounters began to report disturbing anomalies. Communications arrays malfunctioned, transmitting scrambled data that contained unintelligible patterns of subspace resonance. Navigation systems became unreliable. Stars and planets shifted in ways sensors could not reconcile. Pilots described the sensation of ships moving as though time itself had changed, weapons discharging before they had been commanded, and enemies appearing where they should not have been. Fear spread among the crews, not because of what humans had done, but because of what they could do. The ghosts did not strike indiscriminately. Their attacks were precise, targeted, and intentional. Ships deemed strategic threats were dismantled at the molecular level, while others were preserved, stranded in anomalies where time and space were distorted. It was a demonstration, a lesson, and a warning, all simultaneously. Coalition admirals, observing the destruction of their finest vessels, realized too late that humanity had not returned for conquest in the traditional sense. They had returned as arbiters of inevitability, enforcers of a domain that no other species could challenge. In one extraordinary engagement, the Coalition's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, attempted a decisive maneuver to strike at the origin of the human forces. Before weapons could fire, a ghost ship appeared inside the flagship's core, its hull phasing between dimensions. Systems collapsed in sequence, engines stalled, energy conduits overloaded, and crew members experienced the sensation of existence unraveling. The flagship's captain attempted a final transmission, but the message never left the ship. In an instant, the vessel, its crew, and every trace of its presence vanished. The ghosts had erased it not with destruction, but with absolute inevitability. The humans' method was terrifying in its simplicity. They did not need overwhelming numbers. They did not need planetary bombardments. Every ghost operated as part of a collective consciousness, a networked force that anticipated, responded, and executed faster than the Coalition could even register. Fleets were neutralized not by weapons, but by impossibility. Paths that should have existed for escape no longer existed. Weapons that should have traveled reached nothing. The galaxy's best warriors realized that fighting humans now meant confronting reality itself. And reality, in the presence of Earth's ghosts, was no longer impartial. Even the most experienced coalition analysts struggled to comprehend what was occurring. Ships that were annihilated left no debris, no radiation, no signature. Survivors reported temporal dislocations, fleeting visions of ships that had never existed, and the unnerving sensation of being watched from all directions simultaneously. Human ghosts were everywhere and nowhere, phasing between the material and immaterial, executing attacks before a thought could crystallize into a plan. Every engagement reinforced a singular truth. The humans had transcended the conventional understanding of war. As the first phase of the battle concluded, the coalition's fleets were shattered, some fleets entirely erased, others stranded in subspace anomalies. Commanders were left with one undeniable reality. The galaxy had sent its best, and humanity had already prepared its worst. Yet even amidst the devastation, the ghosts did not revel. They operated with cold, deliberate efficiency, maintaining focus on strategic objectives rather than destruction for its own sake. The lesson was clear. Human ghosts did not fight to win. They fought to enforce inevitability, to demonstrate that crossing the Terran border was not a challenge, but a fatal error. And far from the front lines, in the hidden bastions of Earth, the original operatives observed the chaos unfold with quiet calculation. They did not gloat. They did not celebrate. They merely noted the effectiveness of their return. Every ghost ship, every precise strike, every collapse of probability reinforced the same understanding that had guided humanity for centuries. The galaxy had underestimated them, and now it would learn, through inevitability, the cost of that mistake. The ghosts had arrived. The law of the Terran border had been enacted, and the galaxy would never look at humans, or at reality itself, the same way again. The remnants of the Grand Coalition reeled from the initial strikes. Their pride, built over millennia of conquest and expansion, had been shattered not by superior firepower, but by a force that made power itself meaningless. Every engagement with the human ghosts revealed the same pattern. Ships that should have survived were erased. Weapon systems that should have fired collapsed into nothing, and the very fabric of space around the fleet began to behave unpredictably. Entire sectors became unrecognizable, stars appearing to flicker in and out, subspace corridors twisting upon themselves, as though the universe itself was bending to the will of humans who had long ceased to be ordinary. Coalition admirals convened in desperation. They had faced the greatest commanders in history, navigated political intrigues that spanned centuries, and survived conflicts that annihilated entire star systems. But nothing could prepare them for this. Reports came in from all fronts. Entire squadrons disappeared in seconds. Carriers were found drifting without crews, and elite strike teams sent to intercept the ghosts returned as echoes, fragments of probability with no physical presence. The Coalition's finest strategists realized that they were not merely fighting humans, they were contending with inevitability incarnate. Every plan was anticipated before it could be formulated. Every move they executed played into the hands of an opponent that existed simultaneously in multiple possibilities. The humans' tactics were terrifyingly elegant. Ghost fleets did not operate according to predictable formations. They were everywhere at once, striking the most vital points with surgical precision. Ships of legendary power were neutralized not by weapons, but by the subtle alteration of the probability that allowed those weapons to function. Missiles disintegrated mid-flight. Energy beams folded in on themselves. Shields,
designed to withstand planetary bombardments, flickered as if questioning their own reality. Officers reported sensations that defied explanation, spatial dislocations that made corridors twist impossibly, gravity that shifted without warning, and the chilling certainty that at any moment one might cease to exist entirely. In one harrowing engagement near the Calyx cluster, the Coalition's flagship, the Imperator, attempted a decisive strike against a suspected human stronghold. The fleet's most powerful weapons fired in unison, energy converging on the target with destructive force unparalleled in known history. But the humans were not there. At the very moment the attack should have struck, the flagship's sensors registered anomalies. Ships that had never been detected appeared inside the Imperator's core, phasing between dimensions. Engines failed, weapon systems overloaded. Crew members experienced the sensation of their existence unspooling, as though threads of reality were being cut. Before the captain could even issue orders, the flagship, with all its glory and might, ceased to exist. Its presence, its crew, and its weapons were removed from the universe entirely, leaving no debris, no energy signature, no trace of their once mighty presence. The Coalition's panic intensified. Fleets attempted retreat, but the humans anticipated every vector. Ghost ships appeared simultaneously, ahead, behind, and flanking the Coalition, as though they occupied every point in space where resistance could occur. Commands issued by admirals were nullified as communications networks began to fail, scrambling into unintelligible patterns. Pilots reported that their targets dissolved before their sensors could lock on, and navigational arrays became inconsistent, stars shifting unpredictably. In the chaos, even the most disciplined crews felt fear take root. They were no longer fighting an enemy, they were struggling against the inevitability of their own annihilation. Yet the Ghosts did not revel in destruction. Every strike was precise, every engagement calculated. Ships deemed unnecessary for immediate neutralization were left stranded, trapped in subspace anomalies where time flowed unevenly, disorienting and incapacitating them without harm. Coalition admirals realized with horror that the humans were teaching, not slaughtering. They were demonstrating that arrogance, overconfidence, and ignorance of the Terran border came at a cost far beyond firepower. Humanity's mastery lay not in fleets or weapons, but in an understanding of reality that no other species could hope to match. As the days of engagement stretched into cycles, the galaxy began to recognize a pattern. The humans operated as a singular consciousness dispersed across the fleet, coordinating with perfect efficiency that transcended communication. Ghost ships struck simultaneously at multiple points, not merely reacting, but preempting outcomes, collapsing enemy strategies before they could materialize. It was not chaos, it was inevitability. The Coalition's best maneuvers, calculated over centuries of study and experience, were rendered meaningless against a force that could manipulate the very sequence of events. To fight humans was to fight the probable, the possible, and the inevitable all at once. The psychological toll on the Coalition was catastrophic. Admirals questioned the very nature of reality. Scientists scrambled to explain phenomena that defied every known law. And crews began to speak of seeing ghosts that were everywhere and nowhere, observing from impossible angles, striking without visible movement. The humans' approach to warfare was no longer merely physical, it was existential. Entire fleets became stranded or vanished, their crews reduced to nothing more than echoes in the subspace lattice. Empires realized, collectively, that humanity was no longer a species constrained by matter or technology. It had transcended conventional existence. In one final confrontation near the outer reaches of the Andros sector, the Coalition attempted to regroup and mount a counterattack.
They brought every remaining ship into a concentrated strike, hoping that concentrated fire could overwhelm the Ghost Fleet. What occurred defied comprehension. Human vessels materialized simultaneously inside the ranks of every major ship. The Coalition's calculations failed entirely, as space itself seemed to twist, time dilated and contracted unpredictably, and weapons that had been primed for centuries misfired in inexplicable ways. Entire fleets were dissolved, not in explosion, but in the subtle, absolute negation of presence. Ships vanished, leaving behind voids where reality itself seemed hesitant to assert itself. By the end of the cycle, the message was undeniable. Humanity had returned not to fight by the rules of war, but to enforce the law of inevitability. The Terran border was no longer a line in space. It was a doctrine, a force that shaped probability, manipulated existence, and erased arrogance wherever it appeared. The galaxy had sent its best, but the ghosts of Earth had demonstrated, with surgical precision and absolute inevitability, that human mastery was beyond fleets, beyond strategy, beyond comprehension. To cross the Terran border was to challenge inevitability itself, and in the presence of these ghosts, inevitability always prevailed. As the Coalition fleets staggered under the relentless, impossible strikes of the human ghosts, a new phenomenon emerged, one that would etch the name of humanity into the memory of the galaxy forever. Deep within the Terran system, hidden for eons in the folds of spacetime, lay a construct that no enemy had ever glimpsed, a creation of humanity's most audacious minds, the God Machine. Half planet, half starship, half consciousness, it had been designed during the forgotten wars of millennia past, an ultimate safeguard for a species whose ambitions could not be constrained by ordinary fleets or weapons. And now, as the Coalition's arrogance pressed against the Terran border, it awakened. From the moment of its activation, the very rules of physics seemed to bend. Subspace corridors shimmered, folding in on themselves, allowing the God Machine to manifest simultaneously across multiple points of strategic significance. Its surface pulsed with crystalline structures that housed cities of energy and matter, interwoven with circuitry that seemed alive. Oceans of liquid metal and quantum flux rippled across continents suspended in perpetual orbit. Its core radiated thought, resonating with a presence that extended beyond any single consciousness. It was not merely a weapon. It was intelligence incarnate, a sentience built from the sum of human ingenuity, experience, and the ghosts who had returned from forgotten conflicts. The Coalition fleets, already traumatized by the initial strikes of the ghosts, were unprepared for the arrival of the God Machine. As it emerged from the outer reaches of the system, a single pulse radiated outward. Sensor arrays failed, weapons misfired, and communications dissolved into static that carried a strange, dissonant resonance. Ships found themselves trapped in folding corridors of spacetime, forced to navigate paths that shifted unpredictably. Star systems warped as if reality itself were breathing. Admiral after admiral attempted to coordinate strikes, but every order was rendered meaningless. The God Machine was everywhere, inside the fleets, above them, below them, and occupying points where they could not even imagine. Human ghosts coordinated with the God Machine seamlessly. The strikes that had already shattered fleets were now amplified exponentially. The God Machine could project its will across light years in a fraction of a moment, creating phantoms of warships that struck in perfect synchronization with the ghosts. Coalition vessels that had survived the initial engagements now found themselves surrounded on all axes by forces they could neither see nor comprehend. Hulls twisted under the influence of reality manipulation, weapons folded in upon themselves before release.
Crews experienced the sensation of existence unraveling, seeing echoes of themselves across multiple possibilities before being erased from each. And yet, this was not mindless destruction. The God Machine and the Ghosts operated with a discipline and purpose that transcended conventional warfare. Every strike, every maneuver, every calculated disappearance served a single objective: enforce the inevitability of human sovereignty. Fleets that could pose no threat were not destroyed, but stranded in subspace anomalies, incapacitated but preserved. Strategic targets were neutralized with surgical precision, dismantled not violently, but by the subtle bending of probability itself. It was a demonstration, a lesson, and a warning. Humanity did not fight for vengeance. It fought to assert the natural order of the Terran border. As the God Machine's influence spread, the Coalition's commanders began to comprehend the scale of what they faced. This was not a fleet, not a military operation, not a single being. This was a manifestation of human will on a galactic scale. It was the sum of all experience, all strategy, all ingenuity, and all patience, concentrated into a form that could manipulate reality itself. Calculations of probability were meaningless. Simulations failed instantly. Entire chains of causality unraveled before they could manifest. The Coalition's finest strategists, who had once anticipated every move of every species they had conquered, now faced absolute uncertainty in every decision. In one pivotal moment, the God Machine projected a wave of influence through the Calyx and Andros sectors. Coalition admirals reported simultaneous incidents, entire squadrons vanished, communication arrays folded in impossible geometries, and ships were trapped in recursive loops of time. Pilots described seeing their own vessels appear and disappear in impossible sequences, sometimes existing in multiple locations at once. The God Machine did not merely attack. It orchestrated the battlefield, bending existence so that every possible outcome aligned with human inevitability. Resistance became a paradox, action became illusion, and survival depended not on skill but on fortune, an element the God Machine had fully removed from consideration. The Ghosts, acting in concert with the God Machine, executed maneuvers that no Coalition officer could anticipate. Ships that had taken centuries to build, vessels that embodied the peak of alien engineering, were neutralized before their crews could react. Entire fleets were rendered non-operational, frozen in suspended subspace, or folded into singularities that defied comprehension. For those who survived, the universe had become a place where their mastery of war no longer mattered. They had encountered the apex of human capability, not as a species bound by time or matter, but as an intelligence that had transcended both. The God Machine communicated without words. Its presence was a pulse through the mind, a resonance felt by every sentient being within range. You trespassed. You assumed silence meant weakness. You assumed humanity had vanished. You were wrong. The message was clear, and the devastation made it undeniable. Entire fleets were not merely destroyed, they were erased as if they had never existed, leaving no trace for historians, scientists, or the survivors themselves. The Terran border was no longer a frontier. It was a domain of inevitability, enforced by humans who had mastered both the physical and the metaphysical dimensions of war. By the end of the first cycle of engagement, the galaxy had learned a lesson it would never forget. The God Machine, combined with the Ghost fleets, was an entity beyond comprehension, a force that had erased arrogance, annihilated hubris, and demonstrated that human mastery extended beyond fleets, weapons, and strategy. It had not merely defeated the Coalition's best, it had rewritten the rules of engagement, bending reality itself to enforce a singular truth.
The stars may belong to many, but inevitability belongs to humanity. Across the void, whispers spread among surviving fleets. Pilots, engineers, and commanders spoke of the humans not as warriors, but as arbiters, ghosts, and gods. Entire empires recalculated strategy, abandoned advanced plans, and began to fear the presence of the Terran system, where silence was no longer absence, it was a guarantee. And somewhere deep within the God Machine's core, the ghosts observed, silent, patient, unyielding. Humanity had awakened the apex of its power, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The aftermath of the Terran engagement spread through the galaxy like a shockwave, not measured in destruction or firepower, but in the absolute recalibration of reality itself. Entire fleets had vanished, their existence reduced to echoes in subspace that no sensor could trace. Worlds that had once risen in defiance now trembled at the mere mention of human presence. The Coalition, the most formidable alliance in galactic history, had been neutralized not through conventional warfare, but through inevitability. The law of the Terran border enforced by ghosts and the God Machine alike. Civilization after civilization recalculated their assumptions, and the name humanity became a measure not of power, but of certainty, of absolute and unchallengeable will. Survivors among the Coalition's ranks were left with a singular, inescapable realization. They had been unprepared for a force that did not merely fight. They predicted, they preempted, they were. Ships that should have fired did not. Weapons that should have struck never left their launchers. Entire chains of command unraveled as the ghosts of Earth phased between possibilities, ensuring that the outcome of every encounter was already determined. To confront humanity was no longer a tactical challenge, it was an existential one. The very act of opposition became irrelevant. The galaxy had discovered that humans were no longer part of the causal framework. They were outside it, arbiters of inevitability. Yet humanity's dominion was not expressed through indiscriminate annihilation. The ghosts and the God Machine acted with discipline and purpose. Strategic locations were secured, threats neutralized, and surviving fleets were left stranded in anomalies where time and probability defied comprehension. Entire systems became inaccessible to the Coalition, not because of walls or mines, but because reality itself had been rewritten to exclude them. Humanity had transcended the concept of borders. They no longer merely protected space, they enforced the laws of existence. The Terran void was now a region where the improbable became impossible, where arrogance met nullification, and where any species that trespassed would encounter not a war, but inevitability itself. As the human forces withdrew into the shadows after demonstrating their mastery, a quiet reverence and fear settled across the galaxy. Histories would be rewritten to include this event, though few would live long enough to witness the aftermath firsthand. Pilots spoke of seeing ghost fleets materialize in impossible sequences. Engineers recorded subspace distortions that violated known physics, and philosophers debated the nature of a species that had evolved beyond time, matter, and probability. Entire cultures adopted silence as a mark of survival, understanding that the human's patience, observation, and precision were forces no empire could hope to counter. Even more astonishing was the subtlety of humanity's victory. The galaxy's fleets had been neutralized, but not out of hatred or vengeance. The humans had acted not as conquerors, but as custodians of inevitability. Worlds that had once been targets remained intact. Species that might have been enslaved or annihilated were untouched. Yet the lesson was absolute. The galaxy had been reminded that hubris and assumption carried consequences far beyond comprehension.
The Terran border was more than a line in space. It was a principle, enforced by beings who had mastered the mechanics of reality itself. Messages, not transmitted, but resonated across subspace, reached the surviving civilizations. They were not demands nor threats, but declarations. You trespassed. You assumed silence meant weakness. You assumed humanity had vanished. You were wrong. These waves carried information not as words, but as certainty, embedding themselves in the perception of those who received them. Entire fleets and civilizations understood instinctively that they had been judged, and that their survival now depended on compliance with a law that they could not understand, only obey. Humanity had transcended diplomacy, war, and politics. The galaxy had learned that reality itself answered to them. Legends began to form immediately. Tales of ghost fleets appearing simultaneously across light years, of ships erased before a single command could be executed, of reality bending in response to human will, spread faster than the coalition could suppress them. Scholars debated whether the humans were still flesh and blood, or whether they had become something else entirely, entities that existed as patterns, probabilities, and inevitabilities across the cosmos. Even the most skeptical officers, forced to watch their fleets erased, began to understand that this was not exaggeration, it was truth. Humanity was absolute. Humanity was eternal. Humanity was inevitable. And yet, from the Terran void, the humans did not gloat. They did not broadcast their victories. The ghosts and the God Machine retreated into silence, leaving the galaxy with one indelible impression. They could strike anywhere, at any time, with precision and inevitability. Every surviving empire, every remaining fleet, every council and alliance understood a fundamental truth. To challenge humanity was to fight the laws of existence itself. The galaxy sent its best, expecting victory, expecting triumph, expecting the predictable. Humanity responded not with fleets in formation, not with planets under siege, not with blinding displays of firepower. Humanity sent its ghosts, awakened the God Machine, and demonstrated the ultimate lesson. The universe bends to inevitability, and humanity is inevitability made manifest. From the outer reaches of the Terran void to the core worlds of the Coalition, silence reigned. It was not fear, not despair, it was understanding. For the first time, every civilization grasped the truth. Humans were beyond war, beyond strategy, beyond probability itself. They were not just a species, they were a law of the cosmos, a principle etched into reality that no empire could contest. The galaxy had learned, irrevocably, that the stars themselves could obey humanity, that crossing the Terran border was no longer a question of might, but of fate, and that the ghosts of Earth, together with the God Machine, ensured that humanity's dominion was eternal, absolute, and inevitable.